Yes, I'm Aidan Connolly, Vice President of Corporate Accounts with Alltech. I've been with Alltech now for 23 years, and this current position based in Washington, D.C., I've had for the last 3.5 years. So I think that the issues that agriculture is facing can be separated into simplistically short-term, longer-term. I'm going to start with the long-term. The long-term is very, very optimistic. Long-term, people are going to consume more food, want to consume more food in general, but also better quality food. So we're seeing an increase in the demand for proteins, meat, milk and eggs, and in general upgrading of the nutrition of the planet. We also expect by 2050 to see an increase in the total amount of food required by about 70%. Short term, however, we do have some issues. We have issues relating to some political decisions which have been taken to convert some of the foods that we currently need into ethanol and into oil-based fuels. That obviously represents a certain level of challenge to start with. At the same time, we see that the requirement for food is very much on an edge. We have very low levels of grains. We don't have the ability to respond to crises such as, for example, famine in the same way as we did before. So the grain stocks and inventories are at an all-time low. That has, with increased demand, caused an increase in the food price index. Food price index increasing affects political stability. For example, the Arab Spring, many of the issues of the Arab Spring can be directly related back to problems and increases in food prices in those countries. So I think in the short term, we'll continue to see a lot of political instabilities, which will affect directly food consumption and food availability. But long term, this is still a career that I'd love to be involved in. Even though I've already done 23 years, I think it probably is a more exciting career now than it ever was in the past 20. Primary one is the realization that this business is increasingly global. Whereas in the past, the food price in the United States for a particular commodity or particular food stuff, for argument's sake, milk, might have been affected by the milk price in another state, or even perhaps the milk price in Canada. Increasingly, we're seeing that milk prices, pork prices, chicken prices, corn prices, sugar are global. They rise and fall together. So I think it's incredibly important to understand what's going on in other countries. Therefore, my recommendation is get a passport, get on a plane, go to those countries, learn what's going on at first hand, speak to people, ask questions, but learn as much as you can about the world. I think it's not sufficient anymore to simply know the agriculture in your home state or indeed to know it in your home nation. Well, I think that the three things that God gave us and that we can't recreate are land, water, and sunshine. And the countries that have those, 2-3 of those, have a huge advantage, obviously, over anybody else. Much of that's already been harnessed, particularly in the United States, but there are parts of the world which have not fully harnessed it so far. Brazil is one example. Africa is probably the biggest example. And there are countries who strategically are positioning themselves to take advantage of that. Classic examples there would be Saudi Arabia, would be China, would be Korea, who have been investing huge amounts of money into Africa to turn the land from being less productive into being highly productive, instituting and installing the latest technology, the latest agribusiness methods. So I think that moving forward is going to make Africa a powerhouse in terms of food production. And those changes can be seen already. There have been huge changes in terms of land ownership and land and leasing agreements in Africa in the past 5 years. I would say that other parts of the world will continue to improve, but those are the areas where I see the greatest changes taking place. Well, I think that for some of us who travel a lot, and I have had the opportunity to go to over 100 countries, you sometimes feel that agriculture, agribusiness is not something that you can fully talk to everybody about because they don't understand it or because they don't fully understand some of the things we do. That for me has changed dramatically in the last 3 years. I don't think I'm ever on an airplane or I'm ever at an airport or ever meeting somebody at a meeting who, whether their interest is in agriculture or not, that they don't want to talk about food and where it's going and what's happening. A lot of that is being occasioned by the dramatic increase we've seen in food prices, particularly outside of the Western world, where food is such a large percentage of a person's income. But even anybody's interested in foreign policy, anybody's interested in politics, will all understand that food is at the basis of a lot of our discussions today. So food is the story. It has been the story now for the last 3 or 4 years. I think everything suggests it's going to be the main story for the next 3 or 4 years. Well, I think from an agricultural point of view, it's critical, as I've mentioned already, to go global, travel the world as much as possible, learn as much about what's going on. I mentioned be curious, that is, find ways to continuously learn. I think that anybody involved in this business will typically take home a book or journal or something to read in the evening. And if they don't, then they very quickly become devalued in terms of their own skill set. I think that we need to understand the ethical side of what we do. I describe that in terms of being a brand, that not just branding companies or branding countries, we also need to brand ourselves. And we have opportunities through Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter to do exactly that. But I think understanding how to do it properly, understanding the long-term implications. We're in a world and a business which is actually remarkably small, and where people can get to know you very well. So you stand or fall based on your own standards. I think it's very important to understand what you do well. I describe this in terms of sticking to your core competencies, profiting from your core. And I think that's very important for a person to do. And above all else, I feel very important to feel that you've done something for the world. Making money, having a 9-to-5 job, at least for me, is not enough. I want to feel as though I'm part of something greater, that I have changed the world fundamentally. And I think Bill Gates described this very well when he said that we're all here for a reason, and let's make sure that we get the most out of that. So I think that those for me are the rules in terms of what I've learned from my short 20-something years with Alltech in this business, and ones that I'd certainly pass on to any young person coming in today. Well, what's most impressive about meeting the Brazilian farmers is how quickly they embrace new ideas. And what's very impressive, I feel, about China is that China, very much at government level, has an understanding that technology can be the differentiating factor between winning and losing. The hunger for learning in places like India is overwhelming. You go there and you feel almost exhausted by their desire to learn from everything that a person like myself might have in terms of experience. So I think that's very, very important, is to understand it's not just continuously learning, but that whenever anything new comes up, that you're one of the first to try it, to use it, to embrace it, to not be negative, to not do what a lot of us want to do, which is say that's not what I do or that's not the way I've done it before, but to be the first to do it. So I see in the world, in countries and companies and people, that the difference between succeeding and not succeeding very much will be the rapidity, the speed with which we embrace new technologies.